Dust chokes the air. Steel clashes against steel. Men scream Joshua's name as the sun bleeds gold across the western sky. Time is the enemy now. If darkness falls, everything is lost. The enemy kings will escape into the mountains. The soldiers will vanish into the night. Years of fighting, years of faith, years of following an invisible God into an impossible promise. All of it could unravel before morning. Joshua stands in the center of chaos, surrounded by exhausted men, their faces streaked with blood and dirt. His commanders are shouting. His soldiers are stumbling. Victory is so close he can taste it. But the sun keeps moving. It always does. That's the rule. That's how the world works. The sun rises. The sun sets. No one argues with time. Yet standing there, watching the light fade, Joshua feels something building inside him. Not panic, but pressure. A dangerous kind of faith. What do you do when time itself is working against you? Welcome to our channel. Please subscribe, like and share for more uncovering of hidden truths from history and scriptural tales. 5 kings had united against him. 5 armies. 5 fortified cities. It started when Gibeon, a great city, larger than Ai, filled with warriors, made peace with Israel. No battle. No bloodshed. Just a treaty. And the other kings were furious. Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, sent word to 4 others, the kings of Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon. Come, he said. Help me attack Gibeon. They've betrayed us and sided with Joshua and the Israelites. So they came. 5 kings. 5 armies. A force so massive the ground trembled beneath their march. They surrounded Gibeon, choking off every road, every escape. The city was trapped. And in the middle of the night, desperate messengers broke through the siege lines, running through darkness toward Joshua's camp. Their message was simple, urgent, terrifying: do not abandon us. Come quickly. Save us. All the Amorite kings have united against us. Gibeon's fate now rested in Joshua's hands. And Joshua had until dawn to decide. Joshua stood alone in his tent that night, the weight of leadership crushing down on him. He could ignore the plea. Let Gibeon fight its own battles. After all, they had deceived Israel once before, pretending to be travelers from a distant land when they were actually neighbors. But a treaty was a treaty. A promise was a promise. And then, in the silence, God spoke. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just clear. Do not fear them. I have given them into your hands. Not one of them will stand against you. The words settled over Joshua like armor. The promise was absolute. The outcome was guaranteed. But promises don't remove the need for action. They require it. God had spoken. Now Joshua had to move. He called his commanders. Wake the men. We march tonight. They stared at him. Tonight? We'll be exhausted before we even arrive. Joshua's voice was steady. God has already given us the victory. We just have to show up. Because a promise still requires obedience. They marched through the night. No torches. No rest. Just the sound of thousands of feet moving in darkness. From Gilgal to Gibeon was a brutal climb, uphill, through rocky terrain, under a moonless sky. Men stumbled. Some collapsed. But Joshua pressed forward. Faith doesn't wait for convenience. It moves when the moment demands it. The soldiers whispered to each other, confused, exhausted. Why are we doing this? Why now? But Joshua knew something they didn't: surprises win wars. The Amorite kings expected Israel to arrive in days, maybe weeks. They expected negotiation, preparation, strategic planning. They didn't expect an army to appear at dawn. Hour after hour, Joshua's men climbed. Their legs burned. Their lungs screamed. But they kept moving. And as the first hint of light touched the eastern horizon, they crested the final hill. Below them, spread across the valley, were the 5 armies, massive, confident, unaware. Joshua raised his hand. The signal was given. And the enemy had no idea what was coming. The attack came like lightning. One moment, the Amorite soldiers were waking, stretching, starting fires for breakfast. The next, Israel was upon them, swords flashing, war cries splitting the air. Panic exploded through the camp. Commanders screamed orders. Soldiers scrambled for weapons. Tents collapsed. Horses bolted. Confusion is a weapon. And Joshua wielded it perfectly. The Amorites tried to form ranks, tried to rally, but it was too late. The surprise was total. The chaos was absolute. Israel pressed forward, relentless. Men who had marched all night now fought with supernatural energy. Because when God promises victory, the body finds strength it didn't know it had. The Amorites broke. Thousands of them turned and fled, abandoning their camps, their supplies, their pride. The battle had begun suddenly. Violently. But the real miracle was only starting. Because in heaven, something else was being prepared. Something no human had ever seen before. And the fight was far from over. The Amorites fled west, scrambling down the steep descent toward Beth Horon. Thousands of them, running in terror, leaving everything behind. Israel pursued, cutting them down as they ran. And then the sky opened. Massive stones, larger than any man's fist, began to fall. Not rain. Not hail. Stones. They fell with precision, with purpose, striking only the fleeing Amorites. The sound was deafening, bodies crumpling, screams echoing, soldiers collapsing under the weight of heaven's assault. Scripture records it plainly, more died from the stones than from Israel's swords. Joshua's men stared upward, awestruck, terrified. This wasn't their doing. This was something else entirely. God was fighting from the sky. But even as the stones fell, even as the enemy scattered, Joshua saw the problem. The sun was moving west. The light was fading. Victory was close, so close, but not complete. The 5 kings were still alive, still running. If night came, they would escape into the mountains, regroup, rebuild. And the day was slipping away. The enemy poured down the slopes of Beth Horon, desperate, broken, but still moving. Israel chased them relentlessly. Swords flashed. Blood stained the rocks. The pursuit was brutal, efficient. But Joshua's mind was racing. He could see it happening. The sun sinking lower, shadows stretching longer, the light growing weaker. If darkness fell now, the kings would vanish. They'd disappear into caves, into forests, into the night. And tomorrow, they'd rally their remaining forces. This battle had to end today. Completely. Decisively. But time was the one enemy Joshua couldn't defeat. Or so he thought. He stood on a ridge, watching the sun dip toward the horizon, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His commanders were shouting orders. His soldiers were exhausted. The enemy was scattering in every direction. And then, in that impossible moment, Joshua felt it again, that dangerous kind of faith. The kind that doesn't ask permission. The kind that speaks before thinking. And Joshua made a decision that would be remembered for thousands of years. Joshua turned toward his men. His voice cut through the chaos, "Gather around." The soldiers stopped, confused, panting, covered in dust and blood. Joshua's eyes were locked on the sun, burning low over Gibeon. His jaw was set. His hands were trembling, not with fear, but with something else. Desperation? Courage? Both? He knew what he was about to do. He knew how it would sound. Insane. Impossible. Blasphemous, even. But the promise had been clear, "I have given them into your hands." If God had given them, then the victory wasn't complete until it was complete. And completion required time. Joshua took a breath. His heart pounded. What he was about to ask had never been asked before. Not by Moses. Not by Abraham. Not by anyone. He was about to command creation itself. And either heaven would answer, or he would be remembered as the leader who lost his mind in the middle of a battle. But standing there, feeling the weight of destiny pressing in, Joshua made his choice. He stepped forward. And he spoke. His voice rang out across the battlefield, strong and clear, so everyone could hear. "Sun, stand still over Gibeon. Moon, stop over the valley of Ijalon." The words hung in the air. Soldiers froze. Commanders stared. The enemy, even in their flight, seemed to pause. Did Joshua just command the sun? It was audacious. It was unthinkable. It was the kind of prayer that could shatter a man's credibility forever. Because what if nothing happened? What if the sun kept moving, indifferent, and Joshua was left standing there, exposed, humiliated, a leader who had finally asked for too much? The silence stretched. Every eye turned upward. The sun hung there, low over Gibeon, bleeding gold and red across the sky. And then, it stopped. Not gradually. Not slowly. It simply stopped. The light held. The shadows froze. Time itself seemed to take a breath. And all of creation listened. Because heaven had just responded to a human voice. The sun stood still. The moon halted over the valley. The light didn't fade. The shadows didn't lengthen. The world held its breath. Scripture says it plainly, The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. A full day. 24 hours compressed into a moment that refused to end. Soldiers looked at each other, speechless. Some fell to their knees. Others wept. A few laughed in disbelief. This wasn't a metaphor. This wasn't poetic language. This was recorded in the book of Jasher, witnessed by thousands. The sun stood still. Joshua didn't celebrate. He didn't pause to marvel. He simply nodded and turned back to the battle. "Keep moving," he shouted. "Finish it." Because miracles aren't moments to admire, they're moments to steward. God had given them time. Now they had to use it. Israel surged forward with renewed energy. The enemy, already broken, now felt the full weight of terror. They weren't just fighting men anymore. They were fighting the God who controls the sky. And history paused to watch. There has never been a day like it. Not before. Not since. A day when the sun obeyed a human voice. A day when time itself bowed to faith. The Bible records it with shocking simplicity. The Lord listened to a man. Not a king. Not a priest. A man. Joshua, the son of Nun, the one who had spent years in Moses' shadow, the one who had been told again and again, "Be strong and courageous." And on this day, he was. He didn't ask God to fight for him. He asked God to hold the sky so he could finish what God had started. And God said yes. Scholars have tried to explain it. Scientists have searched for natural phenomena. Skeptics have dismissed it as myth. But the text doesn't argue. It simply states the fact: the sun stood still, and the Lord fought for Israel. The victory continued, hour after hour, under a sun that refused to set. The enemy was crushed. Completely. Decisively. And when the battle finally ended, the 5 kings were gone. The 5 kings ran. Not toward their cities. Not toward their armies. They ran into the wilderness, desperate, panicked. They found a cave near Makkedah and crawled inside, hiding in the darkness like animals. Their power, once absolute, was now reduced to shadows. But you can't hide from destiny. Word reached Joshua quickly: the 5 kings have been found. They're hiding in a cave. Joshua's response was swift and strategic. Roll large stones over the mouth of the cave. Post guards. But don't stop there, keep pursuing the enemy. Don't let them reach their cities. So Israel pressed on, hunting down the fleeing soldiers, cutting off every escape route. And when the pursuit was finally complete, when the last enemy had been struck down, Joshua returned to the cave. The stones were rolled away. Light pierced the darkness. And the 5 kings were dragged out, defeated, humiliated, trembling. These men had once ruled cities, commanded armies, decided the fate of nations. Now they knelt in the dust, waiting for judgment. And justice had not yet spoken. Joshua stood before them, silent for a long moment. His men gathered around, watching. These were the kings who had united to destroy Israel. The ones who had threatened God's people, who had believed their alliance made them untouchable. Now they were nothing. Joshua called his commanders forward, the leaders of Israel's fighting men. "Come here," he said. "Put your feet on the necks of these kings." It was an ancient gesture. A symbol. A declaration. Fear changes sides. The commanders stepped forward and placed their feet on the necks of the defeated kings. The message was clear: your power is broken. Your reign is over. But Joshua wasn't finished. He looked at his men, the soldiers who had marched all night, who had fought under a sun that refused to set, who had witnessed the impossible. And he spoke words they would never forget. Words that would echo through generations. Words that would become the backbone of every battle Israel would ever fight. "Do not be afraid," Joshua said, his voice steady, strong. "Do not be discouraged." He gestured toward the kings beneath their feet. "Be strong and courageous." Then he pointed toward the horizon, toward the battles still to come. "This is what the Lord will do to all the enemies you fight." The promise became visible in that moment. Not theoretical. Not abstract. Real. God doesn't just promise victory, he demonstrates it. The soldiers stared at the defeated kings. They remembered the sun standing still. They remembered the stones falling from heaven. They remembered marching through the night on faith alone. And they understood, this wasn't about their strength. This was about God's faithfulness. Joshua's words became their anthem. Be strong and courageous. Not because you are capable, but because God is with you. The 5 kings were executed according to the law. Their bodies were hung on trees until evening, then taken down and thrown into the cave where they had hidden. Large stones sealed the entrance. A monument to a broken alliance. A reminder of what happens when nations stand against the God of Israel. And the conquest moved forward. Joshua didn't stop. The momentum was too powerful. The fear of Israel had spread like wildfire. From Makkedah to Libnah to Lachish to Eglon to Hebron to Debir, city after city fell. Kings were struck down. Strongholds were captured. The land was subdued. And the reason was always the same. The Lord, the God of Israel, fought for Israel. Not Joshua's strategy. Not Israel's military might. God's intervention. Every victory pointed back to that impossible day when the sun stood still. Word spread across Canaan. Armies trembled. Cities locked their gates. The nations realized they weren't just fighting men, they were fighting the God who controls the heavens. Joshua's campaign swept through the southern region like a flood. Nothing could stop it. But even in the midst of conquest, even in the rush of victory, one truth remained central. Obedience unlocked the miraculous. Joshua had marched when God said march. He had fought when God said fight. And he had prayed when the moment demanded faith beyond reason. And heaven responded. Because the Lord fights for those who trust him, Joshua returned to Gilgal with his army, victorious. The southern campaign was complete. But the story doesn't end with military success. It ends with a question that still lingers today. What actually happened that day? The sun stood still. That's the biblical record. Witnessed by thousands. Written in the book of Jasher. Recorded in scripture. Some say it was a miracle of physics, God manipulating time and space. Others suggest it was an eclipse, a meteorological event, something explainable. But the text doesn't care about our explanations. It cares about one thing. The Lord listened to a man. That's the miracle. Not just that the sun stopped, but that God responded to human faith. Joshua didn't have perfect theology. He didn't quote doctrine. He simply saw what needed to happen and asked God to do the impossible. And God said yes. Because God doesn't wait for perfect prayers. He waits for bold faith. The conquest succeeded not because Israel was strong, but because God was faithful. And history recorded the reason why. There has been no day like it before or after. A day when the Lord listened to a man. A day when the sun obeyed. The final line of the account says it all. The Lord fought for Israel. Not beside them. Not near them. For them. Joshua's story isn't about human heroism. It's about divine partnership. It's about what happens when obedience meets faith, when desperation meets courage, when a human voice dares to ask for the impossible. And heaven responds. The sun didn't obey Joshua. It obeyed God's purpose through Joshua. That's the difference. We don't command heaven. We align with heaven's will and ask God to move. And sometimes, on rare, unexplainable days, he does. The question remains, what happens when you stop limiting God by what seems possible? What happens when you pray like Joshua, boldly, publicly, dangerously? Maybe the sun won't stand still. But maybe something else will. Something you've been too afraid to ask for. Something that requires faith beyond reason. Because the God who stopped the sun is the same God who hears you today. And is still listening. 6 lessons from the day the sun stood still. God responds before the battle begins. Trust him in advance. Obedience often requires movement before clarity comes. Victory depends on God's power, not human strength. God controls time, nature, and every outcome. Bold, public faith can glorify God when aligned with his will. Miracles happen when desperation meets divine purpose.